The night was colder than it should have been for late spring, the kind of cold that settled into the bones of old buildings and reminded anyone living inside them how little insulation they could afford. Elena Cruz sat on the edge of a narrow bed inside her rented apartment in a crumbling housing complex on the south side of the city. The walls were stained with years of damp, the plaster peeling in crooked lines like the veins of a dying leaf. A single lamp on the nightstand flickered weakly, its bulb threatening to burn out at any moment. Rent had consumed most of her paycheck, and what remained had been swallowed by diapers, utility bills, and the constant small emergencies that came with raising a baby alone. Her son Mateo was only 14 months old, still small enough to curl easily against her chest, but already old enough to demand more than she could give. Tonight he cried with a hunger she could not soothe. His little fists pushed at the air, and his face burned red as he wailed. Elena pressed him against her shoulder, humming softly, rocking him back and forth. But the sound did not ease him. His bottle had been filled with nothing but warm water that evening. A poor disguise for the milk that was gone. She had shaken the empty canister of formula 3 times, hoping some hidden measure of powder might fall out, but it remained stubbornly bare. Her eyes stung with exhaustion. It was past midnight. The building's thin walls carried every noise, from the television of the neighbor across the hall to the rhythmic dripping of a faucet that had been leaking for weeks. Elena wished she could close her ears to it all, but the one sound she could not ignore was Mateo's pitiful cry. It sliced through the night and through her chest in equal measure. She had no savings. The little she earned from cleaning the Vale estate was barely enough to keep them afloat. She had considered taking on more shifts, but the commute to the mansion already consumed hours of her day. Most nights she arrived home so late, she barely had the strength to put Mateo to sleep before collapsing herself. Elena reached for her phone, its cracked screen glowing faintly when she pressed the button. She stared at the contacts list. Her sister had already told her she could not help again. Her brother had his own family to feed. Pride and shame warred within her, but hunger was louder. She hovered over the name of her cousin, then pulled back. She had borrowed from him last month and still had not repaid it. Her thumb trembled as she typed a message anyway. The words spilled out in uneven lines, each letter carrying her desperation. "Please, I am sorry to ask again, but I need help. Mateo is almost out of formula. If you can spare $50, I will pay you back on Friday when I get my wages. I promise." She read the message once, heart racing, then pressed send without checking the number carefully. For a long moment, she sat in silence. Mateo whimpered against her shoulder, his cries softening into hiccups from sheer exhaustion. Elena rocked him slowly, whispering that everything would be all right, though she did not believe it herself. She expected nothing more than a curt reply, or perhaps no answer at all. 5 minutes later, her phone buzzed. Her breath caught in her throat. She picked it up quickly, expecting to see her cousin's name, but the screen told her otherwise. "I think you texted the wrong person." The message was clean, polite, unexpected. Her stomach twisted as realization hit. She had sent her plea not to family but to a stranger. Her face burned hot with embarrassment. With shaking fingers she typed back, "I am sorry. Please ignore this. It was a mistake." She set the phone down, pressed her forehead against Mateo's hair, and felt the sting of tears. Another failure, another reminder of how precarious her life had become. She had wanted only to quiet her son's hunger, but instead she had exposed her desperation to someone who now knew too much. 3 miles away, in a glass tower that overlooked half the city, Damien Vale sat alone in his office. The hour was late, yet he remained at his desk, surrounded by silence. The city lights stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. He rarely checked his personal phone, a number reserved for only a handful of people. But tonight, the vibration drew his attention. He read the message once, then again, his eyes narrowing, not in suspicion, but in recognition. It was not the voice of a scammer. It was the voice of someone cornered by life itself. Instead of ignoring it, he found himself wondering about the woman who wrote it. Elena lay back against the wall of her apartment, with Matteo still fussing in her arms, the phone heavy in her palm. She wished the ground could open and swallow her embarrassment whole. Wrong number, she had written, begging silently for the stranger on the other side to forget her existence. Her plan was to toss the phone aside, turn her face into the pillow, and wait for Matteo's cries to fade into exhausted sleep. But her phone buzzed again, she startled eyes darting to the screen. A new message had appeared. "Is your baby going to be okay?" 14 simple words, and yet they hit her harder than any lecture from family, harder than the pitying glances of neighbors. The person had not ignored her. The person had followed up. Elena's instinct screamed to block the number. Nothing good ever came from strangers knowing your weakness, but she hesitated. The question was too simple, too human. She tapped the screen with trembling fingers. "We will manage," she typed. "Sorry again." The reply came almost instantly. "I can help. No strings." Elena laughed under her breath, a broken sound in the darkness. People did not talk like that unless they were lying or looking for something in return. She typed back quickly. "Thanks, but I do not take money from strangers." Her thumb hovered, then she pressed send. For a moment there was silence, blessed silence except for Matteo's tired hiccups. Then the phone lit again. Smart policy. "I am Damien. Now I am not a stranger." Elena froze. Damien. The name prickled something familiar in her memory, though her mind was too foggy to place it. She did not answer. She held Matteo closer, whispering against his hair. "You will be all right. You just have to sleep." She set the phone down, determined to end it, and yet she could not help but glance at the glow, every few seconds waiting for it to fade. In the Vale Tower, Damien Vale leaned back in his chair, staring at the short conversation on his phone. He had typed his name without thinking, though the instinct surprised him. He had not introduced himself to anyone outside of business in years. The phone rested on the desk beside a glass of untouched scotch. He should have left it alone, should have respected the wall between himself and this stranger. But the words of her first message had sunk their claws deep. $50. That was all she had asked. Not thousands, not access, not favors. Just $50 to feed her child until Friday. He thought of the years since the accident, the silence that had followed him like a shadow. People had stopped asking if he was all right long ago. This woman had not asked for sympathy, only survival. Against his better judgment, he opened his banking app. His thumb hovered only a second before he entered her number. $5,000 transferred instantly. He typed one more message. "Already yours, no catch, one less thing to worry about." Elena did not believe it when her phone buzzed again. She opened the notification, blinked twice, then gasped aloud. $5,000 received. She checked the app 3 times, rubbed her eyes, checked again. Her stomach lurched with disbelief. She had only needed 50. She typed with hurried fingers. "This is too much. I only needed 50. The answer returned. "It is already yours. No catch." Elena's throat burned. She had not cried when her landlord threatened eviction, nor when the father of her child disappeared, nor when her car was taken after months of missed payments. But now, staring at the glowing numbers on her phone, she broke. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks. "Thank you. I do not even know what to say." "You do not have to say anything. Just take care of Matteo." Her breath caught. She had not written her son's name in any message. Her eyes widened. "How do you know his name?" For a long moment, there was no reply, only the distant sound of a police siren drifting through the cracked window. Finally, the screen lit. "Because I listen. Something I failed to do once." Elena closed her eyes, her heart pounding. She had no idea who Damien truly was, or why he had chosen not to ignore her. But one thing was certain. Her mistake had not led to scorn or laughter. It had led to something far stranger. A door she had never meant to open now stood wide, and she was too shaken to close it again. The following morning arrived gray and muted light, filtering weakly through the torn curtains of Elena's apartment. She had hardly slept. Matteo finally drifted off after a full bottle for the first time in days, his breathing slow and even beside her. Elena lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, clutching her phone like it might vanish. $5,000 still sat in her account, real and solid yet impossible to believe. She told herself it was a mistake, a trick, something that would be reversed at any moment. But when she checked again, the balance remained. She whispered a prayer of gratitude, even as suspicion gnawed at her edges. No one gave that much without expecting something back. No one except maybe someone who had too much to notice the loss. Across the city, Damien Vale stood in front of the massive glass windows of his office, the skyline stretching endless and hollow. Newspapers called him the Iron Mogul, a man whose empire in technology and logistics touched nearly every corner of modern life. They said he was ruthless, efficient, untouchable. They did not say that he had once been a husband and an expectant father, that a single rainy night 6 years earlier had ended both futures at once. His wife Julia had been driving home from a charity gala when a truck skidded across slick pavement. Damien had been in another city, unreachable until it was too late. Since then, the world had felt like a room with no air. He buried himself in work, hardened his voice, shut doors in the faces of anyone who tried to reach him. The Iron Mogul was a fortress, and the fortress was safe. Until last night. That one message from a woman he had never met, a maid who worked under his roof, but whose existence he had hardly registered, had cracked something deep inside. $50. Not leverage, not greed, survival. He could still hear Julia's voice telling him that kindness mattered most when no one expected it. He had failed her once by not being present, by not listening. He would not fail again. Damien sat at his desk, scrolling through her brief replies. "We will manage. Sorry again. Thanks, but I do not take money from strangers." He almost smiled at the defiance laced in her words. Pride wrapped in desperation, it reminded him of himself. He opened his private security file, typed in her number, and within minutes had her full name. Elena Cruz, 27, originally from New Mexico, moved to the city 5 years earlier, employed in housekeeping at Vale Estate for 9 months. A single mother with one dependent child. He read the sparse details, each one fitting neatly with the tone of her messages. He should have closed the file, but instead, he found himself staring at her photo from the employee record. Brown hair pulled into a practical bun, eyes tired but steady mouth, pressed into a line that suggested she had learned not to expect much from life. He closed the file abruptly, unsettled by his own interest. Meanwhile, Elena, dressed in her uniform, and bundled Matteo into the worn stroller she kept by the door. She debated calling in sick, but the thought of losing wages made her stomach clench. She rode the crowded bus for nearly an hour before reaching the gated entrance of the Vale estate. Guards barely glanced at her. She pushed the stroller along the gravel path, past manicured gardens and marble fountains, into a house so vast it seemed to belong to another universe. As she entered through the service door, she kept her head down, avoiding the gaze of other staff. They whispered sometimes about the master, who rarely appeared, about his cold commands and impossible standards. Elena had seen him only twice, in passing both times at a distance, his tall figure flanked by aides. He had not noticed her, or so she thought. Midday, she carried fresh linens up to the third floor and nearly collided with him at the end of the hall. Damien Vale stood there, phone in one hand, jacket draped carelessly over his shoulder, his eyes colder than the marble floors fixed on her. Elena froze, clutching the linens to her chest. For a moment, neither spoke. Then his gaze shifted down to the stroller parked beside her. Matteo sat there chewing on a plastic ring, oblivious to the weight of the air. Damien's expression flickered, subtle but unmistakable, a shadow of something softer passing behind his composure. Elena felt her pulse quicken. She wanted to run, to disappear, to never admit that the man before her was the same Damien who had sent that impossible transfer. But she knew it already. The way he looked at Matteo confirmed it. He knew. His voice was low, controlled. Is he doing better? Elena's mouth went dry. She managed a nod. Yes, thank you. You should not have done that. Damien's jaw tightened. I do what I choose. There is no debt. He stepped past her, then the scent of his cologne, lingering his presence, leaving the hall colder than before. Elena leaned against the wall, clutching the linen so hard her knuckles ached. The fortress had noticed her, and part of her, against every instinct, wondered if that was a blessing or a curse. That evening, Elena returned to her small apartment, carrying not only her exhaustion, but also the strange weight of their encounter. Matteo had fallen asleep on the bus ride back, his head lolling gently against her arm. She laid him down in the crib, kissed his forehead, and tried to forget the intensity of Damien's stare. She had wanted to avoid his eyes, to remain invisible, as she always had in that mansion, yet something in his look had unsettled her. It was not pity, it was not even curiosity, it was recognition, as if he knew her struggle from within himself. The thought clung to her long after she had locked the door and curled into bed. The next morning, a knock echoed through her thin apartment walls. Elena's heart jumped. No one ever came here unannounced. She pulled on a sweater and crept to the door. A uniformed delivery man stood in the dim hallway with a dolly stacked with large boxes. Delivery for Elena Cruz, he said. She blinked. That cannot be right. He checked his sheet. Address matches. Please sign here. Her hand trembled as she scribbled her name. When the man left, she dragged the boxes inside one by one. Her breath coming in short gasps, she cut the first open with a kitchen knife and froze. Inside were tins of premium baby formula, stacked neatly, the kind she had only ever seen in advertisements. Another box revealed diapers, wipes, glass bottles, still sealed in packaging. A third held jars of organic baby food, tiny spoons, even soft blankets. At the bottom of the largest box, she found a small white envelope with her name, handwritten across it. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single card. He should have what he needs. Matteo deserves better than barely getting by. Damien. No company logo, no receipt, nothing traceable. Just his name. Elena pressed the card against her chest, torn between gratitude and fear. People did not do this, not in her world, not without wanting something in return. She sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes, staring at Matteo as he played with the corner of a blanket. His wide dark eyes looked up at her, innocent and trusting. She whispered, "What do I do with this, mi hijo? How do I accept it?" Hours passed before she dared to open another box, her hands trembling as if each seal might explode. Yet every item was exactly what she and Matteo had needed. Nothing more, nothing strange, no hidden catch, just supplies. That night, for the first time in weeks, Matteo drank until his belly was full. He drifted into sleep with a sigh of contentment, his tiny hand clutching the edge of his blanket. Elena watched him, tears filling her eyes. She had forgotten what peace looked like on his face. She sat there long after her phone resting in her lap. Finally, she typed a message. "You should not have done that." A long pause stretched, then his reply appeared. "I know. I wanted to." She stared at the words, her throat tightening. "Why?" Minutes ticked by. At last, another message arrived. "Because I know what it is like to lose someone you cannot save. And because no child should feel that kind of hunger." Elena pressed a hand to her mouth, shaking. She wanted to argue, to reject his generosity, to reclaim her pride. Yet the sincerity in his words disarmed her. She typed slowly, "I do not want your pity." His answer came. "It is not pity, it is recognition." She leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes. Recognition. The word echoed in her chest. She realized then that this was not just about money. Something deeper connected them, something unspoken. Still, she remained cautious. The world had never given without taking more. Days passed. Each morning, Elena pushed Matteo in his stroller to the mansion, her steps heavy with unease. Yet things had shifted. A new nursery had been prepared within the estate itself, tucked beside the service wing, but furnished with care. Bright rugs, a crib, shelves of toys. Elena found it waiting one afternoon, Ava, the chief housekeeper, explaining that Mr. Vale wanted the child near his mother during working hours. Elena stood frozen at the threshold, her heart clenching. No demand, no explanation, just thoughtfulness. She carried Matteo inside and laid him on the rug. He giggled, reaching for a wooden block, his laughter ringing through the sterile halls like sunlight through storm clouds. Damien passed by later that day, pausing at the open door. He stood quietly watching Matteo play, his face unreadable. Elena felt her pulse race, unsure whether to thank him or accuse him. Instead, she said nothing. He finally spoke, voice low. "Children bring back sound to empty rooms." Then he turned away. That night, Elena lay awake, replaying his words. She sensed in them a shadow of pain, something that mirrored her own loneliness. Pride battled with gratitude until dawn, yet beneath both stirred a fragile seed of trust. She did not know what Damien wanted, but she could not deny what his actions had given. For the first time in months, she did not wake to Matteo's cries of hunger. She woke to his laughter, and that she thought was something worth holding on to. The days that followed unfolded with a rhythm Elena had not known in years. She rose early, dressed in her plain uniform, and carried Matteo with her on the bus ride to the Vale estate. Instead of leaving him behind with a neighbor or worrying over his hunger, she now settled him in the small nursery that had been prepared, as if it had always been meant for him. At first, she entered the room timidly, afraid to let him touch the spotless toys or the pristine blankets. But Matteo adapted quickly, crawling across the soft rug, babbling at the plush animals, and laughing at the sunbeams that streamed through the wide windows. His joy filled the space with warmth, and slowly Elena allowed herself to breathe. She still scrubbed floors and polished silver, but between tasks she would slip back into the nursery to check on him, her heart steadying each time she saw his round cheeks glowing with contentment. Damien was rarely seen during those hours yet. Elena knew he was aware. Once she caught him standing at the end of the hall, watching through the glass with an expression that unsettled her. Not cold, not distant, but heavy with something she could not name. Their paths crossed more frequently than before. She found him one morning in the library, his jacket off sleeves rolled as he sorted through stacks of papers. She tried to slip past quietly, but his voice stopped her. "Is he sleeping?" She turned slowly, clutching the dusting cloth. "Yes, for now." Damien nodded once, returning to his work. The conversation should have ended there yet. Silence stretched between them like a taut string. Finally, Elena spoke, surprising herself. "Why are you doing this?" His eyes lifted to hers, sharp and steady. "Because once someone helped me when I least deserved it." His words hung in the air, too personal for a man who lived behind walls of glass and steel. Elena had no reply. She left quickly, heart pounding. That night she lay awake, listening to Matteo's breathing, turning the words over again and again. She sensed that Damien's gestures were not about charity, but about memory, about something he had lost. And though part of her longed to know the story, another part feared what it would mean to step into the shadows of his past. Days bled into weeks. Matteo flourished, his cheeks rounded, his eyes brightened. His tiny legs grew restless with the urge to walk. Elena flourished too in quiet ways. Her work seemed lighter with him. Close, her exhaustion softened by the comfort that he was safe. Yet pride still gnawed at her. She wanted to repay Damien, to prove she was not merely a recipient of his wealth. One afternoon, as she folded linen in the laundry room, she heard footsteps behind her. Damien entered without announcement, his tall frame filling the doorway. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You still think this is charity?" She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. "Is it not?" His mouth curved almost into a smile, but not quite. "It is survival, and survival is never charity." His words struck her like a cord plucked too hard. She wanted to argue, but found no strength. Instead, she whispered, "I do not like owing anyone. You do not owe me." His reply was immediate, unwavering. Elena swallowed hard, unsure if she believed him. Later that week, a storm swept through the city. Rain lashed against the mansion windows, thunder rattling the chandeliers. The power flickered through the generators held. Elena hurried through her duties, nervous about the noise frightening Matteo. She entered the nursery and found him crying at the thunderclaps, his small body shaking. Before she could scoop him up, Damien appeared, moving faster than she thought possible. He lifted the boy into his arms with a gentleness that belied his reputation, rocking him steadily until the cries softened. Elena stood frozen, watching Billionaire hands cradle her child as if it were the most natural act in the world. Damien glanced at her over Matteo's head. His eyes softened. "Children know when the storm is only outside," he murmured. "What they need is calm inside." The words lodged in Elena's chest. For a fleeting moment, she saw not the iron mogul, but a man who had once held his own child, who remembered what it meant to comfort. That night, after Matteo slept, she typed a message she deleted 3 times before sending. "Thank you for today." His reply came moments later. "You thank me for nothing. He is the one who gave me something back." Elena set the phone down with trembling fingers. For the first time, she realized that whatever invisible thread tied them together was not one-sided. He was giving, yes, but he was also receiving something he could not name. Healing, perhaps, recognition, as he had said. And as much as it frightened her, it also lit a quiet warmth in her chest. The storm passed, but its echo lingered in Elena's thoughts for days. She went about her duties with careful precision, polishing silver scrubbing tile, folding linen, yet each task carried the memory of Damien holding Matteo close. While the thunder roared, she could not erase the image of his strong arms cradling her son, as if the boy had always belonged there. It unsettled her in ways she could not admit, even to herself. She told herself again and again that this was dangerous, that no line should blur between employer and servant, between billionaire and maid. And yet her heart betrayed her each time she glanced toward the nursery and found Damien standing just beyond the glass, watching Matteo with a softness that contradicted his iron reputation. Pride burned within her. She did not want to be seen as a dependent, a woman rescued by a man who would forget her as soon as novelty faded. She had survived too much to accept. Pity had carried Matteo alone through nights of fever and hunger, through threats of eviction and whispers of failure. She could not surrender that pride, even if her soul longed for the safety Damien seemed to offer. One evening, after finishing her duties, she lingered by the nursery door. Matteo was asleep in his crib, his tiny hand clutching the ear of a stuffed rabbit. Damien entered quietly, his steps soundless on the polished floor. He looked at her for a long moment, then at the child. "You still think this is charity," he said softly. Elena straightened her arms folded tightly across her chest. "Is it not?" She answered. He shook his head. "This is recognition. Recognition of what she asked," her voice sharper than she intended. "Of strength," he replied simply. "Of someone who would rather break than beg, who still chose to ask only when the child's hunger left no choice." His words cut deep. Elena felt her defenses crumble, but forced her chin higher. "I do not want to owe you," she whispered. "You do not?" Damien said. "The world owes you." His tone carried such conviction that she could not meet his eyes. Silence stretched between them, thick with words unsaid. Finally, she turned away, unable to bear the intensity. That night she lay awake, Matteo's soft breathing beside her, while guilt and gratitude battled in her chest. She wanted to repay him, to prove her worth, to show she was more than a woman with empty hands. Yet what could she give a man who owned everything? A week later, Elena found herself in the mansion library, dusting the tall shelves. Damien entered carrying a folder, his presence filling the vast room. He glanced at her briefly before sitting at the long oak table. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the rustle of paper. Finally he spoke. "What did you do before this, Elena?" She hesitated, then answered. "I studied accounting. I was close to finishing a degree. But then Matteo came and the father." She stopped. Damien's eyes lifted. "He left," she finished quietly. "So I took whatever work I could." His expression did not change, but something flickered beneath his composure. "You gave up a future for survival," he said. "I adjusted," she corrected. "There is a difference." His mouth curved slightly, the closest she had seen to a smile. "Adjustment requires strength." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. She turned back to the shelves, her hands shaking around the dusting cloth. The days rolled on, each one weaving a finer thread between them. She continued to resist, to hold her pride like armor, but the truth grew harder to deny. Matteo thrived in the nursery. She herself felt less hollow, more alive. And Damien, despite his iron walls, seemed to breathe easier in their presence. One afternoon, she found him sitting on the nursery floor, beside Matteo, stacking blocks with surprising patience. The sight rooted her to the spot. He looked up, caught her watching, and for once did not retreat behind his mask. "Children remind us that the world can be simple again," he said. She wanted to answer, but emotion stole her voice. That night she typed another message. "I want to pay you back somehow." His reply came swiftly. "For what?" "For the formula for the nursery, for not ignoring me." A pause, then his words. "You already did. You reminded me I am still human." Elena pressed her phone to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. Pride and gratitude no longer felt like enemies, but like threads of the same fabric. Perhaps she thought healing did not mean refusing help. Perhaps it meant accepting that giving and receiving could both carry dignity. Elena had begun to find a fragile rhythm between her work and the strange sanctuary Damien had built for Matteo. But peace in the mansion never lasted long. Whispers began among the other staff, sharp voices that drifted through hallways when they thought she could not hear. They said the maid had found a way to the master's heart, that she was clever with her eyes lowered, and her silence well-timed. Some laughed behind her back. Others looked at her with pity or envy. Elena tried to ignore them, focusing only on her duties and her son, but gossip was like smoke. Once it spread, it was impossible to contain. The rumors did not stay within the staff quarters. One afternoon, she noticed the stern gaze of Mrs. Halloway, the estate manager who had long ruled over the household, with clipped orders and icy precision. Mrs. Halloway stopped her in the corridor, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Be careful," she said. "Men like Mr. Vale do not rescue maids. They replace them." Elena's cheeks burned, anger and humiliation colliding inside her chest. She wanted to scream that she had not asked for rescue, that she had never planned any of this. But words failed her, and she walked away, clutching Matteo's stroller, as if it were her only anchor. Within days, the whispers reached the outside world. A tabloid published a photo snapped through the mansion gates. Elena walking with Matteo Damien, visible in the background. The headline screamed of scandal, the billionaire and his maid, a forbidden romance blooming in secret. By the next morning, copies were plastered across newsstands online. Feeds filled with speculation. Elena's phone buzzed with calls from numbers. She did not know messages she did not want to read. She deleted them all, her hands shaking. Panic consumed her. She imagined Damien's fury, imagined being cast out. Jobless, ridiculed. But when she arrived at the mansion that day, Damien was waiting. He stood in the entry hall, newspaper folded neatly in his hand. His face was calm, but his eyes blazed. He extended the paper to her. "Do you know about this?" Elena nodded, voice trembling. "I am sorry, I never—" He cut her off. "You think this is your fault. I never wanted to cause trouble," she whispered. "I can leave." For the first time, she saw anger flash across his features, not directed at her, but at the world. "You will not leave. You did nothing wrong." His voice carried such finality that she fell silent, stunned. He paced the marble floor, his jaw tight. "They want a story to sell. That is all. And if the board sees it," she asked, "if your company suffers?" Damien stopped, turning toward her with eyes so sharp she could not look away. "Let them see. I built this empire. I will not let them dictate who I can protect." The intensity of his words made her heart stumble, yet fear still gnawed at her. She thought of Matteo, of the fragile safety they had found. If his world collapsed, theirs would too. That evening, Damien called a meeting with his advisors. Elena overheard fragments as she cleaned the outer hall. Words like optics and liability floated through the heavy air. One advisor urged distance, another recommended silence. Damien's reply carried through the door steady and cold. "I will not deny what is true." When the meeting ended, he found her in the nursery. He crouched beside Matteo, brushing the boy's hair with surprising tenderness, then looked up at her. "They will try to use you against me. I will not let them." Elena swallowed hard. Why, she whispered, why risk everything? Because Damien said quietly, "You and your son reminded me that my life did not end 6 years ago." She felt tears prick her eyes. Confusion and longing tangled together. She wanted to believe him, to step into the safety his words offered, yet fear of falling, fear of being discarded, chained her tongue. Days turned to weeks, and the storm of rumors only grew. Reporters camped outside the mansion gates, drones hovered above the gardens. Flashes of cameras invaded even the quiet streets near Elena's apartment. She learned to pull her hood low to shield Matteo beneath a blanket. Inside the estate, tension thickened. Staff avoided her whispers sharpened. Mrs. Halloway's disapproval became outright hostility. One evening, Elena overheard her on the phone. "If this continues, the shareholders will not tolerate it. He is blinded. He needs to remember his place." The words chilled her. It was no longer only gossip. It was a weapon. That night she typed a message to Damien. "Maybe it is better if I go." The reply came swift and unyielding. "Do not run. You have nothing to fear from me." She stared at the screen, tears welling. For so long she had lived in fear, fear of hunger, of abandonment, of weakness. And now, here was a man who refused to let her flee, who faced storms with iron certainty. She did not know if it was courage or recklessness. All she knew was that her life had entwined with his, and the world would not let go. The pressure around the mansion mounted until it felt like every breath Elena drew carried the weight of 1,000 eyes. Reporters still gathered beyond the iron gates, their cameras flashing at every movement, and articles spun new stories each day, some cruel, some speculative, none true to what was happening inside those walls. Elena tried to shield Matteo from it all, carrying him quickly through hallways, singing lullabies louder than the voices that seeped through television screens. Yet the tension within the staff grew unbearable. One afternoon, she returned to the kitchen to find 2 maids whispering viciously. "She thinks she is special," one said. "She thinks she belongs here." Elena bit her tongue until it bled, carrying her tray out in silence. But that evening, as she folded laundry, Mrs. Halloway entered with her clipped footsteps and icy gaze. "This cannot continue," she declared. "Mr. Vale may believe he is above scandal, but the rest of us know better. You are a distraction, Miss Cruz. Worse, you are a liability." Elena stood stiff, her hands trembling over the cloth. "I have done nothing wrong," she whispered. Mrs. Halloway's lips curved into something colder than a smile. "That is what all of you say, until men like him tire of you." Her words sliced through Elena's composure. She wanted to defend herself, to scream that Damien was not like that. Yet fear gnawed at her because she could not be certain. She remained silent, but the wound festered. Days later, a board meeting was called within the mansion itself, executives arriving in sleek cars, their suits pressed, their voices clipped with authority. Elena caught only fragments as she served drinks in the outer hall. They spoke of investors, of stock fluctuations, of reputational risk. One voice rose above the others. "This relationship, if we can call it that, must end before it destroys everything we have built." Elena's heart slammed in her chest. She had no right to hear these words, yet every syllable pierced her. Later that night, Damien sought her out. He found her in the nursery, Matteo asleep in his crib, the glow of a lamp casting soft light across the room. Elena turned sharply, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "They want you to end this," she said, her voice trembling. "They want you to end us." Damien closed the door behind him, his presence filling the space like a storm. His jaw tightened. "They do not decide my life." She shook her head. "But they hold your empire, your reputation. I will not be the reason you lose everything." His eyes burned into hers. "You're the reason I have something again." The force of his words stole her breath. She looked away, unable to hold the intensity. "I am just a maid," she whispered. "You are a billionaire. Our worlds do not fit." He stepped closer, his voice low and fierce. "Our worlds already collided the moment you sent that message. I could have ignored it. I did not, because it mattered. Because you mattered." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You do not understand. I cannot survive another abandonment. If you tire of me, if this ends, Matteo, and I will have nothing." Damien's expression cracked, pain shadowing his features. He reached out his hand, hovering near her cheek, before dropping to his side. "Do you think I do not know abandonment? Do you think I have not buried more than I could bear? My wife, my daughter. They were taken from me in one moment. For 6 years I breathed without living. Until you." His voice broke on the last words, rough and raw. Elena's sob caught in her throat. She turned to him, searching his eyes, and for the first time she saw the depth of his wounds. Not the iron mogul the world feared, but a man carved hollow by loss. Slowly trembling, she whispered, "I did not want to need you, but I do." His hands finally reached for hers, enclosing them in warmth. "And I did not want to feel again," Damien said, "but I do." Silence enveloped them, heavy and fragile, until Matteo stirred softly in his crib. Both turned to him, their joined hands tightening instinctively. Elena's tears blurred her vision as she looked at her son, then back at the man who had breached every wall she built. The confession hung in the air between them, neither promise nor guarantee, but truth. Later that night, Damien summoned the courage to stand before the board again. Elena was not there, but she imagined his voice, iron and unyielding, as he declared that he would not be dictated by fear or optics. He had built the company with his own hands, and he would live with his own choices. Some would leave, he warned, but others would follow. A man who chose integrity over image. When he returned to the nursery, exhaustion lined his face, yet his eyes glowed with certainty. Elena asked softly, "What will they do?" "What they always do," he answered. "Threaten, withdraw, test me, but I will not bend." She wanted to argue, to beg him not to risk so much, but something inside her had shifted. She believed him. For the first time in years, she believed someone might stay. That night, as the storm outside quieted and silence wrapped the mansion, Elena sat by the crib, watching Matteo sleep, Damien's presence steady at her side. She realized then that healing did not come in sudden bursts, but in steady steps, in the collision of two broken hearts daring to trust again. The weeks after Damien's declaration to the board were heavy with tension. Some executives resigned their loyalty, severed, while others lingered, watching closely for cracks. The media frenzy grew louder, stories multiplying each day, until Elena could hardly step outside without flashes blinding her eyes. She learned to pull her hood lower, to clutch Matteo closer, to walk quickly as though speed could shield her from the cruel words hurled by strangers. Gold digger, opportunist, scandal. Each headline burned her pride, each whisper scraped her spirit raw. She endured for Matteo, but the weight pressed harder with every passing hour. Damien remained firm, unshaken in his presence, but she saw the toll it took. His voice grew rougher after long calls, his shoulders heavier, as he returned from meetings that drained him. Yet whenever he stepped into the nursery, his expression softened, as if Matteo's laughter erased the battles outside. Elena clung to those moments, yet fear gnawed at her relentlessly. One night the breaking point arrived. She returned to her apartment in the poor building she still rented, carrying Matteo against her chest. The hallway was crowded with neighbors, their faces drawn with worry. Mrs. Lopez, who lived across from her, rushed forward. "Men were here," she whispered. "They asked questions about you, about the baby." Elena's blood ran cold. She hurried inside, locking the door, but the damage was done. Threats had followed her home. Someone from the outside world had reached into the only space that was hers. She sank to the floor, Matteo fussing against her, and sobbed until her chest ached. Later that night, she typed a message to Damien. "I cannot stay in this storm. It will destroy him." His reply came almost instantly. "You are safe with me, always." But safety felt like a fragile dream. She knew enemies circled, shareholders who wanted leverage, reporters who craved scandal. They would not stop. The next day she met Damien in his study, the fire casting shadows across the dark wood. "I need to leave," she said, her voice trembling. "For Matteo." Damien rose slowly, his eyes narrowing. "You think running will save him? They already know who you are, where you live. They will follow you anywhere." Elena's breath caught. "Then what am I supposed to do?" His jaw tightened. "Stay. Stay here, where I can protect you." She shook her head, tears spilling. "And when the world tires of me, when they force your hand, what then?" Damien stepped closer, his voice raw. "Do you still not see? This is not about obligation. This is about choice. My choice." His words struck her like thunder, yet her fear remained. She remembered the look in Mrs. Halloway's eyes, the scorn of the staff, the fury of the board. She could not condemn Matteo to a life under scrutiny, to whispers he would one day understand. That night she packed a small bag, clothes for Matteo, a blanket, formula. She looked once more at the nursery, at the toys Damien had bought at the crib, that had become a symbol of safety, and her heart split in two. She whispered to her sleeping child, "We have to go." But as she reached the front door, Damien was waiting. His tall figure silhouetted against the dim hall light. His voice was quiet but unyielding. "If you walk out now, you are not protecting him. You are teaching him to fear love." Elena froze, her chest heaving. Damien stepped closer, his eyes piercing hers. "I lost my family once because fate decided. I will not lose another because fear decided." His words shattered the last of her defenses. The bag slipped from her trembling hands. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "I am so afraid." Damien reached out his hand, steady. "Then let me carry the fear with you." For a long moment, she stood frozen, torn between survival and surrender. Finally, she placed her hand in his, the simplest act, yet the most terrifying of all. In that instant, she knew the breaking point had not destroyed them. It had carved the truth from stone. The decision to stay was like stepping onto a fragile bridge, suspended over an abyss. Elena felt the weight of every gaze still burning from beyond the mansion walls. Every whisper of scandal, every headline that painted her as something she was not. Yet inside the mansion, the air shifted. Where fear had once built walls, something else began to grow. Damien no longer hid his presence around her. At breakfast, he sat at the same table while she fed Matteo, occasionally reaching to wipe a drop of milk from the child's chin, his hand steady and unguarded. At night, he walked with her through the gardens, the city lights glowing in the distance, his voice lower softer, telling her of his childhood of the day. He first realized wealth was both a crown and a cage. She listened, and in his words she found pieces of herself reflected back. Elena still battled doubt. She wondered if love could truly exist between two such different worlds, if their bond was nothing more than a fleeting escape from loneliness. But each time Damien looked at Matteo, as though the boy were his own. Each time he looked at her, as though she were more than a maid. More than a single mother, she felt the truth deepen. One evening, as autumn leaves drifted against the windows, Damien invited her to the library. A fire glowed in the hearth books, casting shadows along the walls. On the table lay a folder thick with documents. He handed it to her without a word. Inside, she found papers for a scholarship fund in her name, designed to help single mothers finish their education. Her throat tightened. "This is your idea," she whispered. "It is yours," Damien corrected. "You spoke once of wanting to finish your degree. I thought perhaps others should have the same chance." Tears blurred her vision. "Why would you do this?" "Because I can," he said simply. "Because you deserve to be more than what the world tried to reduce you to." Elena pressed the papers to her chest, overwhelmed. For years she had fought alone, scraping for dignity, clinging to pride. And now here was a man who did not strip her of that pride, but amplified it, who did not rescue her, but restored her voice. Their bond grew undeniable. One evening she stood on the balcony, Matteo asleep inside the night air cool against her skin. Damien joined her, his presence grounding. She turned to him, her heart racing, and spoke words she had feared for too long. "I love you." Silence stretched, and then his hand lifted to her cheek. His eyes fierce with emotion. "And I have loved you from the moment you reminded me I was still alive." Their lips met not in a desperate rush, but in a tender collision of broken pieces finally finding fit. It was not the kiss of fantasy, but of healing of wounds stitched together by trust. In the weeks that followed, the mansion transformed. Where whispers once poisoned, the hall's laughter now echoed. Matteo's giggles filled rooms that had long been silent. Even Mrs. Halloway's rigid demeanor softened, though her disapproval never fully disappeared. Outside the gates, the media still speculated, but inside a family was forming fragile, yet unbreakable. The world saw scandal. They lived truth. Months later, Damien held a press conference. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but his voice carried calm authority. He acknowledged the rumors, spoke of loss, spoke of finding humanity again. Then he introduced Elena and Matteo, not as shameful secrets, but as his family. The uproar was immediate, some calling it reckless, others praising his courage, but none of it mattered to Elena as she stood beside him, Matteo's tiny hand gripping hers. In that moment she realized the healing was complete. She was no longer just a maid or a single mother scraping through life. She was a woman who had faced storms and still stood tall. She was loved beyond measure, not for what she could provide, but simply for who she was. And Damien, once a man entombed in grief, had found breath again through her. Their love did not erase the divide of class, but transcended it, proving that dignity, compassion, and devotion could weave a bridge stronger than wealth or power. That night, back in the nursery, Elena whispered to Matteo as he drifted into sleep, "We are home now, not because of walls or riches, but because of love." Damien stood behind her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, his eyes filled with quiet certainty. For the first time in years, the future no longer frightened her. It beckoned. Together they stepped into it, no longer broken pieces, but a whole bound not by fate's cruelty, but by choice. A love beyond class, a healing beyond fear, a story not of scandal, but of redemption.